What happens when this person sworn to uphold the law becomes its most flagrant violator? And what happens when their victim is the one person you'd never expect? This isn't just a story about a traffic stop. It's the story of Judge Tessa Holloway, a woman who reached the pinnacle of the justice system only to have it turned against her on a dark, lonely road. It's a story of prejudiced power and the terrifying moment when a badge is used not as a shield for the public, but as a weapon. And it's the story of a reckoning so profound, so fitting, it could only be written by the unsparing hand of fate itself. The Honorable Judge Tessa Holloway loved the quiet solitude of her late-night drives home. The 12-hour days in Superior Court were a maelstrom of human tragedy and legal minutiae. Robberies, assaults, custody battles, and the endless parade of lives fractured by a single bad decision. On the bench, she was a bastion of impartiality, her face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality, her voice a steady, measured instrument of the law. But in the leather-cocooned silence of her 2024 Mercedes E-Class cruising down the suburban parkways of North Carolina's affluent Mecklenburg County, she could finally let the mask slip. Tonight, a Friday in late September, was particularly draining. A complex fraud case had culminated in a guilty verdict, and while she knew justice was served, she couldn't shake the image of the defendant's wife sobbing silently in the gallery. Tessa was 52, but on nights like this, she felt every year of it. She had fought her way from a working-class family in Charlotte to the top of her class at Duke Law, to a feared and respected prosecutor, and finally to the bench. Her car, a sleek sedan in graphite grey, wasn't a symbol of opulence, but a hard-earned reward. It was her sanctuary. She switched the radio from the news to a classical station, letting the soothing notes of a Vivaldi concerto wash over her. The streetlights painted fleeting stripes of gold across her hands on the steering wheel. She wore a simple, elegant pantsuit, her judicial robes folded neatly in a garment bag on the back seat. She was just Tessa now, a woman tired to her bones, looking forward to a glass of Chardonnay and the company of her golden retriever, Winston. She was less than 2 miles from her home, in the tranquil tree-lined neighborhood of Ballantyne, when the world behind her exploded in a strobing fury of red and blue. Tessa's heart gave a slight surprised jolt. She immediately checked her speedometer. 64 in a 65 zone. Her registration was current, her insurance immaculate. She hadn't drifted from her lane. Confused but not alarmed, she signaled her muscle memory as a law-abiding citizen taking over. She pulled over to the right shoulder, the gravel crunching softly under her tires. She turned on her interior dome light, rolled down her window, and placed her hands visibly on the top of the steering wheel, just as she'd advised countless young people to do. A police cruiser, a standard Ford Explorer, pulled up behind her, its headlights pinning her in a blinding glare. The driver's side door opened, and a figure emerged, silhouetted against the lights. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a swagger that felt more like a patrolman in a movie than a public servant. As he approached her window, his features came into view under her dome light. He was a white man in his late 30s, with a short military-style haircut and a jaw that looked like it was permanently clenched. His name tag read, Jensen. "License and registration," he said. The words were clipped devoid of any courtesy. There was no ma'am, no, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "Of course," Officer Tessa said, her voice calm and even. She reached slowly toward her glove compartment. "May I ask what the reason for the stop was?" Officer Jensen's eyes narrowed. He shined his flashlight directly into her face, forcing her to squint. "You can get your license and registration, and then I'll ask the questions. That's how this works." A flicker of annoyance went through Tessa. She had presided over cases involving officer conduct. She knew the line between professional firmness and unprofessional aggression. This was bordering on the latter. Still, she complied, retrieving her wallet and the registration from the glove box. She handed him her driver's license and the vehicle registration card. He took them without a word, his gaze sweeping from the documents to her face, then around the pristine interior of the Mercedes. A smirk played on his lips. A small, ugly thing. "Tessa Holloway," he read aloud, drawing out her name with a mocking tone. He tapped the registration. "This car is registered to you." "Yes, it is," she said, her patience starting to fray. "This is a nice car," he said, his flashlight beam moving from her face to the polished wood grain of the dashboard. "A real nice car for you." The implication, thick and venomous, hung in the air. Tessa's blood ran cold. She had dealt with racism her entire life, from the subtle slights in law school to the more overt prejudices in her early career. But she had naively thought that her position, her success, had built her a fortress against this kind of raw, undisguised bigotry. She was wrong. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping a register, taking on the firm, authoritative tone she used in her courtroom. "It is my car. My license and registration confirm that. If there is no traffic violation, then I would like to be on my way." Jensen chuckled a harsh, grating sound. He leaned in closer, his arm resting on her open window frame. She could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "See, here's the thing, Tessa. We got a bolo out. Be on the lookout for a car just like this, reported stolen about an hour ago over in the city. A black woman was seen driving it." Tessa stared at him, her mind a finely tuned legal machine trying to process the absurdity of the statement. "Officer, that is impossible. I have been in my chambers or on the bench all day. I left the courthouse 40 minutes ago. This car has been in the secure judicial parking garage since 7:30 this morning." "That's a good story," Jensen said, his smirk widening. "You probably got one for where you got the fancy suit, too." From the passenger side of the cruiser, another officer emerged. He was younger, his face etched with uncertainty. His name tag read, Miller. He approached Jensen, staying a few feet back. "Everything okay, Mark?" Miller asked, his voice hesitant. "Yeah, everything's fine." "Rookie," Jensen shot back without looking at him. He turned his attention back to Tessa. "I'm thinking we've got our car thief right here. What do you think, Miller? A woman who looks like her driving a $60,000 Mercedes in this neighborhood? Seems a little suspicious." Tessa's shock was rapidly being replaced by a cold, controlled fury. She was Judge Tessa Holloway. She had sentenced men like Jensen for perjury, for abuse of power. And here he was, accusing her of grand theft auto on the side of a road she'd driven down 1,000 times. "Officer Jensen," she said, her voice like ice, "I am a superior court judge for this county. That is my name, and that is my car. I am suggesting in the strongest possible terms that you run my license plate, verify my identity, and terminate this unlawful detention immediately." Jensen threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, theatrical laugh that echoed in the quiet night. A judge. Oh, that's a new one. A judge. Lady, I've heard it all. I've had guys tell me they're secret agents, astronauts, the damn Pope. A judge. You're not even dressed like a judge. "My robes are in the back seat," she said through gritted teeth. "I'll bet they are," he sneered. "Along with the Pope's hat, I suppose. Step out of the car. Now." "I will not," Tessa stated flatly. "You have no probable cause for this. This is a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights." Jensen's face went from smug to menacing in a heartbeat. The mask of civility, thin as it was, vanished completely. "You want to quote the law to me. I am the law out here. Now I'm going to tell you one more time. Get out of the car, or I will pull you out." Officer Miller took a nervous step forward. "Mark, maybe we should just run the plates again." "Call it in and verify with dispatch." "Shut up, Miller." Jensen barked, his eyes still locked on Tessa. He reached for the handle of her car door. Tessa knew she was at a crossroads. She could continue to argue, to stand on her rights, but she saw the look in his eyes. It was a look of a man who had absolute power in this moment and was reveling in it. It was the look of a predator. The legal battle would have to be fought later in a different arena. For now, this was about survival. With a deep breath, she unlocked the door and slowly, deliberately stepped out of her sanctuary and into the flashing lights of her nightmare. The night air was cool, but Tessa felt a clammy heat rising up her neck. The strobing lights of the cruiser disoriented her, fragmenting the world into jarring flashes of red, blue, and black. Officer Jensen stood before her, his bulk blocking the view of her own home, so close, yet impossibly far. "Turn around." Hands on the car, he commanded. "This is completely unnecessary," Tessa said, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "My judicial ID is in my wallet. My court credentials, you haven't even looked at them." "I looked at your driver's license, lady. That's all I need," he spat. "Now are you going to comply, or do you want to add resisting arrest to your grand theft auto charge?" Her legal mind screamed at her. This was a textbook case of unlawful procedure. There was no reasonable suspicion that had morphed into probable cause. This was harassment, pure and simple, built on a foundation of racial profiling so blatant it was almost a caricature. But her survival instinct told her something else. This man was itching for a fight. He wanted her to resist. He wanted an excuse to use force. She would not give it to him. Slowly she turned and placed her palms flat on the cool, smooth roof of her Mercedes. The metal was solid real, a grounding force in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. She stared at her own faint reflection, a distorted image of a woman in a business suit, illuminated by the lights of a police car. "Spread your feet," Jensen ordered. She complied, the indignity of the position a burning coal in her stomach. She could feel Officer Miller's unease, radiating from behind her. He wasn't saying a word, a silent accomplice to this farce. Jensen began a rough, invasive pat-down. His hands moved over her body with a detached professionalism that was somehow more violating than overt aggression. He found nothing, of course. No weapons, no contraband. Just a powerful, respected judge being treated like a common street criminal. "Okay," he said, pulling her hands behind her back. "You are under arrest for possession of a stolen vehicle." The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs locking around her wrists was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The steel bit into her skin. A wave of nausea and disbelief washed over her. She had sentenced hundreds of people. She had watched bailiffs place handcuffs on them countless times. She had never, not in her wildest imaginaries, conceived of being on the receiving end. "Officer Jensen, you are making a catastrophic mistake," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Yeah. Save it for the judge." he sneered, oblivious to the crushing irony. He grabbed her by the upper arm, his grip unnecessarily tight, and started marching her towards his cruiser. "Mark, hold on." Miller finally spoke up, his voice cracking. He held a phone in his hand. "Dispatch just came back. The plate is clean. It's registered to Tessa Holloway at an address in Ballantyne. There's also a flag on her name, a high-level security clearance. It says she's a superior court judge." For a single fleeting moment, the world seemed to right itself. Tessa stopped expecting Jensen to halt, to stammer an apology to unlock the cuffs. Instead, Jensen tightened his grip on her arm, his knuckles digging into her bicep. "Dispatch gets things wrong all the time." He hissed, his voice low and venomous, so only she and Miller could hear. "And anyone can get a flag put on their file if they know the right people. It just proves she's connected. Probably connected to the car theft ring." It was at that moment Tessa understood. This was no longer about a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was malicious. Jensen had been proven wrong, and instead of admitting it, he was doubling down, tripling down, burying himself deeper in his lie because his pride and his prejudice would not allow him to be corrected by a black woman in a nice car. "Put her in the car," Miller Jensen ordered. Miller looked from his phone to Jensen to the handcuffed judge. His face was a canvas of conflict and fear. He was a rookie. Jensen was his training officer, a man who held his career in his hands. But Mark the Bolo, I just checked the log. It was for a silver Lexus, not a grey Mercedes. And the suspect was described as a male in his 20s, Miller stammered. Jensen shoved Tessa forward, making her stumble. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Put her in the car. Or do you want to be on traffic duty in the middle of nowhere for the next 5 years?" The threat worked. The flicker of defiance in Miller's eyes died, replaced by cowed submission. He opened the back door of the cruiser. Jensen pushed Tessa down onto the hard plastic seat. She had to contort her body to get in her suit jacket, riding up the handcuffs, digging painfully into her back. The door slammed shut, sealing her in a cage of plastic and metal that smelled of sweat and disinfectant. Through the reinforced glass, she watched Jensen confront his partner. Though she couldn't hear the words, she saw the aggressive body language, the jabbing finger, the way Miller flinched and nodded. The blue wall of silence was being built right before her eyes. Jensen then got on his radio. "Dispatch be advised, suspect in custody. We're en route to Central Precinct. The suspect is uncooperative and is making outlandish claims." Outlandish claims. The truth was now an outlandish claim. The drive to the precinct was a blur of humiliation. People in other cars stared, their faces curious or indifferent as they passed the police cruiser. They saw a black woman in the back and likely thought nothing of it. Just another criminal. The thought was a dagger to her heart. Her reputation, her life's work, was being erased by the prejudices of one rogue officer. At the station, the degradation continued. She was paraded through the building, a trophy for Jensen. He pushed her into the processing room, where she was fingerprinted, the black ink staining the hands that had signed legal orders and gavels just hours before. Her mugshot was taken a harsh flash, capturing the fury and disbelief in her eyes. They took her shoes, her belt, and her purse. Inside her purse was her judicial ID card, with her photo, the seal of the state, and her title in bold letters. Jensen picked it up, glanced at it, and tossed it into the property bag with a scoff. "Nice fake ID," he muttered. Finally, she was led to a holding cell. It was cold, grim, and smelled of urine and despair. The heavy metal door clanged shut, the sound of the bolt sliding into place echoing the finality of her situation. She was alone, stripped of her identity, her dignity, and her freedom. She sat on the hard metal bench, the cuffs still biting into her wrists. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her emotions. A single hot tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated rage. Officer Mark Jensen had picked a fight with Tessa Holloway. He thought he was fighting a suspected car thief. He had no idea he had just declared war on a judge of the Superior Court. And Judge Tessa Holloway did not lose her battles. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her mind already shifting from victim to strategist. The first call she would make, the one call she was allowed, would not be to her family. It would be to the most ruthless, brilliant, and tenacious lawyer she knew, David Chen. Jensen's life as he knew it was over. He just didn't know it yet. The phone call was a lifeline in an ocean of indignity. Tessa's voice was steady, betraying none of the chaos swirling inside her as she spoke to the duty officer to place her call. When David Chen's voicemail picked up at 1:30 in the morning, she left a message that was a masterpiece of controlled urgency. David, it's Tessa Holloway. I'm at the Central Precinct. I've been arrested by an Officer Mark Jensen. Badge number 714. The charge is possession of a stolen vehicle. My vehicle. I need you to get down here, and David. She paused, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Bring hell with you. David Chen was not a man who trifled. A former Marine turned defense attorney, he was known for his meticulous preparation and his utter refusal to be intimidated by anyone, least of all the police. He arrived at the precinct less than an hour later, a thundercloud in a $3,000 suit. He wasn't just Tessa's lawyer. He was her friend, her former colleague from the DA's office. They had tried cases together, won and lost, and forged a bond of deep mutual respect. The desk sergeant, a portly man named Wallace, who had been on the force for 30 years, tried to stonewall him. She's in processing. You can see her in the morning. David planted his hands on the high counter and leaned forward, his eyes like chips of flint. Sergeant, let me be very clear. My client is Judge Tessa Holloway. She is being held on a baseless charge which I believe constitutes malicious prosecution and false imprisonment. You have exactly 5 minutes to get me in a room with my client and the arresting officer's report. If you fail to do so, my next call will be to the personal cell phone of the chief of police, followed by a call to the mayor, and then a call to every television news desk in this city. Your 5 minutes started the moment I said your name. Sergeant Wallace. The sergeant's bluster evaporated. He paled, picked up his phone, and began making frantic calls. Minutes later, David was ushered into a sterile interrogation room. Tessa was brought in the handcuffs, finally removed. Her wrists were red and raw. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were bright with a burning intensity. Tessa, are you okay? David asked, his voice softening. I will be, she said, rubbing her wrists. Tell me what you have. Not much, David admitted. The report is thin. Ludicrously so. It claims Jensen initiated the stop based on a bolo for a stolen Mercedes with a female driver. It claims you were uncooperative and couldn't provide proof of ownership. He's lying, Tessa said flatly. The car was a Lexus. The suspect was male. His own partner, a rookie named Miller, told him that at the scene. He saw my ID. He saw my registration. He saw my judicial credentials. He didn't care. This was about putting me in my place. David's jaw tightened. And Sergeant Wallace? He was at the scene, Tessa asked, surprised. No, I mean, here at the desk. No, I dealt with Jensen and Miller, and a booking officer who seemed to be enjoying himself. David made a note. Okay, here's the plan. We're not asking for bail. We are demanding immediate and unconditional release. They have no case. This is a house of cards built on a lie. He was right. Faced with the fury of David Chen and the dawning horrific realization of who they had in their custody, the precinct's command structure crumbled. A flustered-looking Captain Richards appeared offering profuse and stammering apologies. The charges were dropped. All records of the arrest were to be expunged, a promise both Tessa and David knew was a bureaucratic fiction. By 4:00 a.m., Tessa Holloway walked out of the police station, not as a prisoner, but as a warrior. David had her car, which had been impounded, brought around to the front. As she got in, she saw Officer Jensen standing by a window in the precinct, watching her. Their eyes met for a moment across the parking lot. His face was a mask of sullen hatred. He had lost this battle, but his expression told her he wasn't sorry. He was just angry he'd gotten caught. The story, however, could not be contained. Someone inside the precinct leaked it. By the next afternoon, it was the lead story on the Charlotte news affiliate, WCNC. The headline was Explosive Superior Court Judge Arrested, Accused of Stealing Her Own Car. The fallout was immediate and immense. The police chief held a press conference promising a full and transparent internal investigation. He announced that Officer Jensen and Officer Miller had been placed on administrative leave. It was standard procedure, a boilerplate response designed to quell public outrage. But the public was outraged. Civil rights groups, the State Bar Association, and even national news outlets picked up the story. Judge Tessa Holloway became a symbol overnight. Her story was a perfect, infuriating encapsulation of the phrase driving while black elevated to the highest levels of absurdity. Tessa, on David's advice, remained publicly silent. She returned to work on Monday, her head held high. The whispers in the courthouse corridors stopped the moment she entered a room. Her fellow judges offered their support. The lawyers who appeared before her treated her with a newfound reverence mixed with awe. She had endured what so many of their clients had, and had emerged with her dignity intact. Behind the scenes, however, a storm was gathering. David Chen was not satisfied with a simple apology and 2 officers on paid vacation. He filed a formal notice of intent to sue the police department, and Officer Mark Jensen personally for civil rights violations, false imprisonment, and emotional distress. He also hired a private investigator, a former detective named Frank Russo, a bulldog of a man who knew how the system worked, and more importantly, how it was abused. Frank's job was to dig into Officer Mark Jensen's past. Everyone leaves a trail, Frank told David in their first meeting. A cop like this arrogant. This wasn't his first rodeo. I guarantee it. Frank was right. It took him less than a week to uncover a pattern. He found 4 formal complaints filed against Jensen in the past 5 years, all for aggressive conduct and questionable stops involving minority drivers. 2 were from black men in luxury cars, 1 from a Latino family driving a new SUV. All 4 complaints had been investigated internally, and all 4 had been dismissed as unsubstantiated. The investigating supervisor who signed off on all 4 dismissals was Sergeant Wallace. While Frank was digging into Jensen's past, a local investigative reporter named Jessica Finch was doing her own digging. Finch was relentless, with a reputation for breaking stories that officials wanted to keep buried. She started with the Bolo report. The police department refused to release the audio logs, citing the ongoing internal investigation. But Finch had sources. A week after the incident, Finch got a clandestine call from a dispatcher who was deeply troubled by the case. The dispatcher confirmed what Miller had said at the scene. The Bolo was for a silver Lexus. The source also told her something else, something explosive. The original Bolo alert wasn't from a citizen's 911 call. It was a self-initiated report. Officer Jensen himself had called it in, claiming he'd seen a suspicious vehicle matching that description just moments before he pulled over Judge Holloway. This was the twist that changed everything. Jensen hadn't just mistakenly acted on a faulty Bolo. He had allegedly created a fake Bolo himself to give him the pretext he needed to pull over a car he wanted to target. He had manufactured the justification for his own biased policing. Jessica Finch now had the scent of a much bigger scandal. This wasn't just one bad cop. This was potential criminal fraud. She reached out to David Chen, sharing her information. The two battle-hardened professionals, the lawyer and the reporter, formed an unspoken alliance. They were no longer just fighting for justice for Judge Holloway. They were about to blow the lid off a conspiracy of corruption that went far deeper than a single traffic stop on a lonely road. The storm was no longer gathering. It had arrived. The revelation that Officer Jensen may have fabricated the Bolo report transformed the case from a civil rights complaint into a potential criminal conspiracy. David Chen used Jessica Finch's information to put immense pressure on the district attorney's office. It was one thing to have a cop accused of being a racist. It was another entirely to have one accused of falsifying police reports to justify his actions. The DA, a politically ambitious man named Robert Garrison, could no longer dismiss this as an internal police matter. He convened a grand jury. The key to the entire case was Officer Miller, the rookie. He was the only other person present at the scene. The only one who could corroborate Tessa's account and expose Jensen's lies. He was caught between the infamous blue wall of silence and the terrifying prospect of a perjury charge if he lied to a grand jury. David Chen and his investigator Frank Russo decided to apply pressure. They didn't approach Miller directly, which would be improper. Instead, Russo made his presence known. He interviewed Miller's neighbors. He spoke to his former instructors at the police academy. He let the word get back to Miller that he was being scrutinized, that his entire life and career were now under a microscope. Russo wanted Miller to feel the walls closing in, to understand that clinging to Jensen was tying himself to a sinking ship. The tactic worked. Miller, already racked with guilt and fear, retained his own lawyer, a cautious union-appointed attorney. The first domino to fall was Sergeant Wallace. Presented with Frank Russo's investigation showing his pattern of dismissing complaints against Jensen and faced with the grand jury subpoena, Wallace made a deal. He admitted to lack supervision and of taking Jensen's word over the complainants without due diligence. He painted himself as a busy, overworked supervisor who trusted his men too much. It was a self-serving excuse, but it saved him from criminal charges. He was forced into early retirement, his career ending in disgrace. He had protected Jensen for years, but when his own pension was on the line, the blue wall crumbled. The biggest break, however, came from an unexpected source. Frank Russo, digging into Jensen's financials, found a pattern of unusual cash deposits. They were small, never more than a few $1,000s at a time, but they were regular. Following the money, Russo uncovered a connection to a local towing and impound lot on the industrial outskirts of the city. The lot was owned by a man named Stan Kovac, a shady character with a record of minor offenses. Putting the pieces together, Frank and David constructed a horrifying theory. Jensen wasn't just a racist cop. He was a predator running a racket. They believed he was targeting high-end cars in minority neighborhoods, manufacturing probable cause to stop them, and then finding flimsy reasons to have the cars impounded at Kovac's lot. Kovac would then charge the owners exorbitant, often illegal fees to get their cars back. For every car Jensen sent his way, he received a cash kickback. The stop of Judge Holloway wasn't just a random act of bigotry. It was a business transaction gone wrong. Jensen had seen a prize, a late-model Mercedes driven by a black woman, the perfect target for his scheme. He thought she'd be an easy mark, someone who would be too intimidated or powerless to fight back. He never imagined his intended victim was a judge who had the resources and the will to burn his entire world to the ground. When the district attorney's investigators, armed with a warrant, raided Stan Kovac's impound lot, they found exactly what Frank Russo had predicted. Cooked books, a hidden ledger of payments and security footage. The footage was damning. It showed Officer Jensen out of uniform, meeting with Kovac in the back office on multiple occasions, accepting thick envelopes of cash. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Kovac confessed to the entire scheme. He detailed how Jensen would text him a heads-up before a premium car was coming in. He had years of records. The final domino was Officer Miller. The DA's office brought him before the grand jury. They presented him with Kovac's confession and the evidence of the kickback scheme. They showed him the security footage of his training officer taking cash. They made it clear he could either go down as a co-conspirator in a federal corruption case, or he could tell the truth. Looking at the prospect of a prison sentence, his career already in ruins, Miller broke. He wept on the stand. He told the grand jury everything. He recounted the night of Judge Holloway's arrest in minute, painful detail. He confirmed that Jensen had ignored the correct BOLO information. He admitted that Jensen had bragged to him in the past about shaking down rich guys in fancy cars. He confessed that Jensen had instructed him to lie on the initial report and that he had complied out of fear. The grand jury acted swiftly. They handed down a multi-count indictment against Mark Jensen, not just for his actions against Judge Holloway, not for false imprisonment or civil rights violations, which were civil matters, but for felony charges, falsifying a police report, wire fraud, for the fake BOLO call, multiple counts of extortion, and conspiracy. Mark Jensen was arrested not by his colleagues, but by FBI agents to avoid any conflicts of interest. He was fingerprinted and processed in the very same building where he had humiliated Judge Holloway. He was fired from the police force, his union refusing to represent him on the criminal charges. His life, built on a foundation of arrogance and corruption, had completely unraveled. The stage was now set for the final act of this drama. The criminal case of the state versus Mark Jensen was assigned to a courtroom in the Mecklenburg County Superior Court, and due to the random computerized rotation of judicial assignments, the case landed on the docket of one judge in particular. A year after that fateful traffic stop, Mark Jensen, out on bail and looking pale and gaunt, walked into courtroom 5B for his arraignment. He stood before the defendant's table, his lawyer at his side. The bailiff's voice boomed through the silent room. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Tessa Holloway presiding." Jensen's head snapped up. His eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. Standing there cloaked in the black robes of justice, radiating an aura of absolute power and authority, was the woman he had pulled from her car and handcuffed on the side of the road. Her face was impassive, neutral, the same mask of impartiality she wore for every case. But Jensen could see deep in her eyes a flicker of iron-hard resolve. Karma had not just come for him. It had placed a gavel in the hand of his victim, and was now staring him right in the face. The air in courtroom 5B was thick with the scent of old wood floor polish and palpable tension. It was a cavernous room, designed to inspire awe and intimidation, with a high coffered ceiling and dark mahogany paneling. It was a room where fates were decided daily, but today felt different. The usual low murmur of lawyers and clerks was absent, replaced by a strained, expectant silence. Mark Jensen, looking pale and gaunt in an ill-fitting suit, stood beside his lawyer at the defendant's table, his eyes fixed on the empty judge's bench. He felt a cold dread coiling in his stomach. This was his arraignment, the formal beginning of the end. The side door opened, and a bailiff stepped forward, his voice a powerful baritone that filled every corner of the room. All rise. The Honorable Judge Tessa Holloway, presiding. A collective, barely audible gasp swept through the gallery. Necks craned. Whispers erupted like wildfire before being instantly shushed. Mark Jensen's head snapped up as if yanked by a string. His vision tunneled the faces in the gallery, blurring into a meaningless smear. All he could see was the figure ascending the steps to the bench. It was her. The woman from the side of the road, now cloaked in the flowing black robes of absolute judicial authority. She moved with a calm, deliberate grace that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Her face was a mask of serene impartiality, but as her eyes swept the courtroom, they settled on him for a fraction of a second. There was no hatred in her gaze, no triumph. There was something far more terrifying, the placid, unassailable weight of the law itself. In that moment, Jensen realized he wasn't just facing a judge. He was facing a living, breathing monument to his own catastrophic mistake. The floor seemed to drop out from under him. His lawyer, a seasoned defense attorney named Arthur Thorne, was already on his feet, his face a mixture of outrage and disbelief. "Your Honor," the defense immediately moves for a recusal. "This is an untenable and unprecedented conflict of interest. My client cannot possibly receive a fair trial from the very person at the center of the allegations against him." Judge Holloway looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "Your motion is noted, Mr. Thorne. The prosecution may respond." District Attorney Robert Garrison stood his own face set like granite. "Your Honor, the people strenuously object to this motion. To grant a recusal would be to reward the defendant for his own alleged criminal actions. It would set a dangerous precedent, suggesting that any defendant could judge shop by targeting a judicial officer. The state has full faith in this court's, and specifically in Your Honor's documented and unimpeachable ability to remain impartial. This case is no longer about a personal grievance. It is about an officer of the law who stands accused of corrupting his office. Let us not allow his actions to corrupt the judicial process as well." The legal battle raged for a week. Thorne argued passionately about the appearance of impropriety, painting a cynical picture of a judge unable to separate personal trauma from professional duty. The matter was elevated to the chief administrative judge and the state's Judicial Ethics Committee. The city watched, captivated by the real-life drama. The committee's ruling, when it came, was a thunderclap. Motion for recusal denied. Their opinion was a masterwork of legal reasoning, stating that while the situation was extraordinary, Judge Tessa Holloway's exemplary career demonstrated a profound commitment to the principles of justice. They would not allow the system to be manipulated by the very criminal actions it sought to adjudicate. Tessa felt the immense weight of their trust. She knew the world would be watching, and she would not falter. The trial of Mark Jensen began 3 months later, a media sensation. Jury selection was a grueling process, with both sides searching for 12 people who could look past the headlines. Finally, a jury was seated, and the trial began. The prosecution's case was a methodical demolition. They built a wall of evidence brick by brick, starting with the foundation of Jensen's corruption. Stan Kovac, the impound lot owner, testified about the kickback scheme, his voice flat and defeated. The other victims Jensen had targeted took the stand, their stories weaving a damning tapestry of predatory policing. The most difficult testimony came from Officer Miller. He walked to the stand, looking 10 years older, his face etched with shame. He refused to look at Jensen. In a low, cracking voice, he recounted every detail of that night, his words painting a vivid picture of Jensen's malicious intent. He confessed to filing the false report under duress, and his guilt was so palpable it hung in the air like a shroud. Then came the moment the entire city had been waiting for. The people called the Honorable Tessa Holloway to the stand. A hush fell over the courtroom. In a move of profound symbolism, Tessa stood, took off her judicial robes and handed them to the bailiff. Underneath, she wore a simple professional navy blue dress. She walked down from the bench, her heels clicking softly on the floor, and crossed the space to the witness stand. An older, stern-faced judge, brought in specifically for this purpose, administered the oath. She sat her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She did not look like a victim. She looked like what she was, an expert witness to the defendant's crimes. David Chen, who the DA had brought on as a special consultant for this portion, conducted the questioning. "Judge Holloway," he began gently, "could you please recount for the jury the events of the evening of September 22nd? In a voice that was calm, clear, and devoid of histrionics, she did. She detailed the stop Jensen's sneering words, the false pretense of the bolo, and the ultimate humiliation of the arrest. She was factual, precise, her legal mind deconstructing the event into its core components. She spoke of the cold steel of the handcuffs, not with self-pity, but as an evidentiary detail of her false imprisonment. Jensen was forced to sit and listen, squirming in his seat, his face slick with sweat. He was no longer the man in control on a dark road. He was a trapped animal, pinned by the unwavering testimony of his prey. When she was finished, a profound silence held the room. She had not asked for sympathy. She had simply delivered the truth, and its weight was devastating. She returned to the bench, put her robes back on, and resumed her duties. Her composure, a silent testament to her strength. The defense was a feeble, desperate affair. Thorne tried to paint Jensen as a scapegoat, a victim of political pressure. But against the mountain of evidence, the financial records Kovac's ledger, Miller's confession, and the unshakable testimony of the judge herself, his arguments were like dust in the wind. After 2 weeks, the case went to the jury. They were gone for just 4 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were grim and resolute. Jensen stood, his body trembling visibly. The jury foreman, a middle-aged school teacher, handed the folded verdict slip to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. Tessa opened it. She read it once to herself, her expression as impassive as stone. Then her eyes found Mark Jensen. On the charge of conspiracy to commit extortion, she asked, her voice steady. "How does the jury find the defendant?" The foreman stood. "Guilty. On the charge of wire fraud. Guilty. On the 6 counts of extortion. Guilty on all counts. And on the charge of falsifying a police report." The foreman's voice was firm. "Guilty." Jensen's legs buckled. He physically collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands as a wave of sound, gasps, sobs, reporters, scrambling washed through the gallery. The bailiff rapped his gavel for order. Jensen was a convicted felon. At the sentencing hearing a week later, Jensen stood before her for the last time. He mumbled a weak, rambling statement, apologizing for the situation and the way things turned out. An apology so devoid of true remorse, it was insulting. Then it was Tessa's turn. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze fixed on the broken man before her. "Mr. Jensen." She began, her voice quiet, but carrying an immense authority that silenced the room. "We are here today because you violated more than just the law. You violated a sacred trust. A police officer's badge is not a license to bully, to extort, or to enforce one's own prejudices. It is a symbol of public faith, a promise made to every member of society to protect and serve all citizens regardless of their race, their gender, or the car they drive. You shattered that promise." She paused, letting the words settle. "You did not see a citizen on the side of the road that night. You did not see a woman, a professional, a member of your own community. You saw a target for your own greed and a canvas for your own bigotry. In your arrogance, you believed you were untouchable. You believed that the power you wielded gave you impunity. You were fundamentally wrong, because in this courtroom, there is only one power that truly matters, the power of the law. The very law you swore an oath to uphold, and which you so flagrantly betrayed." Her gaze hardened. "The damage you have done extends far beyond a single night. It erodes the very foundation of trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Your actions give credence to the cynical and dangerous belief that the system is rigged, that justice is not blind, but looks away for those with a badge. For such a profound betrayal, the consequences must be equally profound." She looked down at the sentencing report, then back at him, her eyes holding his. "Therefore, pursuant to the statutes of this state and the unanimous verdict of the jury, I sentence you, Mark Jensen, to a term of 10 years in state prison." The sentence landed with the force of a physical blow. 10 years. A sharp collective intake of breath was the only sound. It was a hard, righteous, and unequivocal punishment. 2 bailiffs moved forward. Jensen stood motionless, his face a slack mask of shock. They pulled his arms behind his back, and the sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent courtroom. It was the same sound she remembered from that dark road, but now it was not a sound of humiliation, but of consequence. As they led him away, he lifted his head one last time, and his eyes met hers. The hatred, the arrogance, the smug superiority, it was all gone. In its place was only the hollow, devastating understanding of a man whose world had been justly and completely undone. Judge Tessa Holloway lifted her gavel high. She brought it down with a single sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. Justice, hard and undeniable, had finally been served. Judge Tessa Holloway's story, is a stark reminder that injustice can find any of us, no matter our station in life. But it is also a powerful testament to the fact that one person's courage can ignite a fire that exposes the deepest shadows of corruption. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about a systemic failure, a culture of impunity that was brought to its knees by the resilience of one woman who refused to be a victim. Mark Jensen didn't just pull over the wrong person. He pulled over the very embodiment of the justice he so arrogantly flouted. His karma wasn't just losing his job. It was facing his reckoning in a courtroom presided over by the person whose rights he tried to extinguish. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the true meaning of justice and accountability, please help us share it. Hit that like button, share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that need to be told. What are your thoughts on this case? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.